6 days before my wedding, I found a hotel receipt in my fiancé's email dated 3 weeks earlier for a night he told me he'd spent at his brother's apartment watching game tape and eating terrible pizza. The room was booked for 2. I already had a guess about who the second person was. I just needed enough proof that nobody, including my own sister, could talk their way out of it. Before I tell you how I got that proof, and what happened at my own bridal shower because of it, if you've ever had someone in your own family try to take something that was never theirs to take, hit subscribe and drop a comment, because this one gets messier before it gets satisfying. Here's how it started. My sister Brooke is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's had a specific talent for wanting things more once she noticed I had them. I remember one specific afternoon with unusual clarity, even now, 20 years later. I was 8, she was 6, and I'd just been given a bright yellow bicycle for my birthday, the one I'd asked for by name from a catalog for months. 3 days later, Brooke told our parents she'd changed her mind about wanting the purple one she'd requested for her own upcoming birthday, that she wanted a yellow one exactly like mine instead, so we can match. Our mother, charmed by the sentiment, made it happen. I remember standing in the driveway watching 2 identical yellow bicycles side by side, feeling something I didn't have words for yet, a specific flavor of quiet erasure, the sense that something I'd chosen because it was mine had somehow, within a week, become something we simply both had. Growing up, it was clothes, my favorite jeans mysteriously ending up in her closet with the tags still half attached like she'd meant to return them eventually. In college, it was a summer internship at a design firm I'd interviewed for first, that she applied to the week after I mentioned it, and got, because our aunt happened to golf with the hiring manager. I loved my sister. I want to be clear about that at the start of this before anything else. I also learned slowly over about 26 years to keep a small, quiet inventory of things I cared about that I didn't casually mention around her, not out of cruelty, just out of self-preservation. I met Tyler at a coworker's engagement party 4 years ago. We got engaged last spring after 3 years together on a hiking trail he'd apparently scouted for weeks to find the exact right overlook. My family loved him immediately, my mother especially, who'd tell anyone who'd listen that Tyler was exactly the kind of steady, reliable man she'd always hoped one of her daughters would end up with. I noticed, even at the time, that she said one of her daughters, not you, and I told myself I was reading too much into a sentence that probably meant nothing. My mother mentioned, more than once during that first year of dating, how relieved she was that Brooke and Tyler got along so well. How nice it was that my fiancé and my sister had really hit it off at family gatherings, laughing at the same jokes, finishing each other's sentences about a true crime podcast they'd apparently both started listening to independently, and then discovered they had in common. I remember feeling genuinely happy about that at the time. I'd spent years watching Brooke struggle to connect with boyfriends I'd brought home, watching those relationships fizzle under some vague tension I could never quite name. Tyler and Brooke getting along easily felt back then like something to be grateful for. I didn't yet understand what getting along easily can sometimes actually mean underneath the surface of it. Wedding planning started in earnest about 8 months ago. Brooke volunteered almost immediately to help, more than I'd expected, more than she'd ever volunteered for anything of mine before. I want to be really involved in this, she told me, hugging me a little too long at the dinner where I asked her to be a bridesmaid. You're my sister, this matters to me, I believed her. I want that on the record too, before I tell you what actually happened, because I think it matters that I wasn't looking for problems. I was planning a wedding to a man I loved, with a sister I trusted, and I had absolutely no reason yet to be watching either of them as closely as I eventually started to. My mother used to say Brooke and I were different kinds of ambitious. Her gentle way of describing the fact that I built things slowly and carefully while Brooke had always preferred to simply notice what already existed and decide it should be hers instead. I'd stopped resenting that pattern years ago mostly. I'd made my peace with it. I didn't yet understand how far she was willing to take it this time. The first thing that felt slightly off looking back was how much time Brooke started spending with Tyler directly without me. She'd offered to help coordinate the groomsmen's side of things, since Tyler's best man, his brother Josh, lived out of state and wasn't great with details. That made sense, logistically. What made less sense over time was how many of those conversations seemed to happen over text, late at night, about things that didn't obviously require late-night texting. I saw a notification once, Tyler's phone lighting up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, Brooke's name at the top. "Ha, you're impossible, fine, I'll cover for you with Vanessa." I didn't see the rest of the message. I told myself at the time it was probably about a surprise, a bachelor party detail, something wedding adjacent I wasn't supposed to know about yet. Weddings are full of secrets like that. I genuinely didn't think much of it in the moment. There was a dress fitting a few weeks later, where Brooke showed up wearing a bracelet I didn't recognize, delicate, clearly expensive, the kind of thing that doesn't come from a mall. When I asked about it, she said she'd bought it for herself. A little treat, and changed the subject fast enough that I noticed the speed of the change more than the answer itself. Then there was the night of my own engagement photo shoot, 3 months before the wedding. Tyler had said he'd be running late from work, some deadline crunch. He showed up almost 90 minutes after our scheduled start time, apologetic, a little flustered, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I remember standing in front of the photographer, forcing a smile for a picture that's now framed in my parents' hallway, doing the math on that smell, and coming up with an explanation involving a crowded elevator, because the alternative explanation wasn't something I was ready to let myself consider yet. I mentioned the late arrival to Brooke, not suspiciously, just in passing, the way you mention things to a sister. Work has him so stressed lately," she said, a little too quickly, a little too smoothly, like she'd already prepared the sentence in case someone asked. At my parents' anniversary dinner, about 2 months before the wedding, I watched Tyler and Brooke share a look across the table during a toast. The specific kind of look that comes from a private joke, gone as quickly as it appeared, so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Later that same night, I heard them laughing together in the kitchen while helping clear plates, an easy, familiar laugh that stopped abruptly the moment I walked in, replaced by a slightly too quick shift into asking me if I needed help finding the dessert forks. I didn't put any of these things together yet, not really, not as a pattern. Each one individually had a boring, plausible explanation, and I was busy, genuinely busy, with seating charts and catering deposits and my mother's escalating opinions about centerpieces. It's strange, looking back, how much bandwidth wedding planning takes up, how easily it can crowd out the part of your brain that would otherwise be asking harder questions about the people closest to you. I've thought a lot since then about how exhaustion is its own kind of camouflage, how two people can hide something enormous simply by counting on you being too tired to look closely. The moment that finally cracked something open happened almost by accident, on an ordinary Tuesday, 6 weeks before the wedding, when I borrowed Tyler's laptop to print a boarding pass for our honeymoon flights. His email was already open, logged in from that morning, and I wasn't snooping, not at first. I genuinely just needed to find the airline confirmation buried somewhere in his inbox. What I found instead was a hotel confirmation from a boutique place downtown, dated 3 weeks earlier. A Thursday I remembered clearly because it was the night he'd told me he was at his brother Josh's apartment, watching game tape and eating terrible pizza. A detail specific enough that I'd actually laughed about it at the time. The room was booked for 2 guests. One night, prepaid, no refund. I sat there for a long moment, staring at a confirmation number, feeling something in my chest go very still and very cold at the same time. I told myself there could be an explanation. A work thing. A surprise for me somehow that I wasn't supposed to find yet, though I couldn't construct a version of that story that made any sense given the actual date. I closed the laptop without printing anything, my hands not quite steady, and I didn't say a word to Tyler that night, mostly because I genuinely didn't trust my own voice yet. I hadn't slept. I remember that clearly, sitting cross-legged on my kitchen floor at 6 in the morning, phone against my ear, still in the clothes I'd worn the day before, having spent most of the night simply staring at the ceiling, running through every version of an innocent explanation and finding all of them thinner than the last. I called my closest friend from college, Priya, that morning, and told her everything, the bracelet, the late arrival, the message on his phone I'd half seen, and now this hotel confirmation with a date that didn't line up with anything he'd told me. "Vanessa," she said carefully, "I don't want to say something you're not ready to hear yet, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it instead of just answering fast. Who else's schedule doesn't line up with what you were told on that exact night?" I already knew the answer before she finished the question. Brooke had told our mother she was spending that Thursday at a friend's cabin 2 hours away, unreachable, off the grid for a digital detox. A phrase that had struck me as slightly out of character for her at the time, though I hadn't thought hard enough about why. I spent the next several days in a strange, quiet, watchful state, going through the motions of wedding planning, smiling in dress fittings, approving a final menu, while running an entirely different investigation underneath all of it. I checked the family's shared photo cloud, the one my mother insisted we all stay linked to for the memories, and found nothing from that Thursday on Brooke's account. No photos of any cabin, no digital detox evidence at all, just a suspicious, complete gap in an otherwise photo-heavy month. I found a few days later, almost by accident again, a location-sharing app still active on a family plan none of us had bothered to turn off since our parents set it up years ago for safety. Brooke's location history, when I finally worked out how to check it, without fully admitting to myself yet what I was doing, showed a single, unmoving pin downtown, at an address that matched the hotel confirmation exactly for the entire evening and overnight hours of that same Thursday. I kept looking even after that, unable to stop myself now that the floor had already given way. I found a credit card statement, one Tyler had left open on our shared banking app weeks earlier, and scrolled back to that same date, and found a charge from a flower shop I didn't recognize, $40 2 days before the hotel booking. I don't know why that receipt, more than the hotel itself, was the one that made me physically nauseous. Maybe because flowers felt so deliberate, so unnecessary to the mechanics of an affair, purely a gesture, the kind of small, tender thing he used to do for me early in our relationship, and had, I realized now, mostly stopped doing somewhere over the last year. I sat on my bathroom floor that night, the way you do when you need somewhere small and enclosed to fall apart in, and let myself finally think the sentence I'd been avoiding for a week. My sister and my fiancé had been together at a hotel on a night they'd both separately, carefully lied to different members of our family about. I wasn't going to confront either of them yet. Not until I had something neither of them could talk their way around. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I'm not entirely proud of and also don't regret. I became very, very good at quietly collecting proof without tipping either of them off that anything had changed. I didn't confront Tyler about the smell of perfume or the late night or any of it. I stayed warm, normal, engaged in wedding logistics, while paying close attention for the first time to patterns I'd been too busy or too trusting to notice before. I noticed that Brooke's helping with groomsmen coordination involved almost no actual contact with the groomsmen, who I quietly confirmed through an offhand conversation with Josh, barely heard from her at all. I noticed that Tyler's phone, which used to sit face up on the counter without a second thought, had started staying face down, a small habit that felt enormous once I was actually looking for it. I asked Priya to help me think through what I actually needed, not just to know the truth privately, but to have something undeniable, something that would hold up against however Tyler and Brooke might try to spin it if I confronted them directly. You need more than a hotel receipt and a location pin, she said. Both of those individually have some plausible explanations someone could construct on the spot if they're desperate enough. You need something that removes the wiggle room. In the meantime, I checked what else I could, carefully, without leaving traces. I looked at Tyler's shared work calendar, the one our families both had partial visibility into for scheduling group events, and found 2 blocks marked simply personal, out of office, both falling on dates that lined up with times Brooke had also been mysteriously unreachable, according to a habit I'd started keeping, almost against my own will. A small running list on my phone titled nothing more suspicious than wedding notes, in case anyone ever looked over my shoulder. That wiggle room disappeared about 10 days later, when Brooke, distracted during a bridesmaid dress fitting, left her phone unlocked on the boutique's counter while she stepped into a changing room. I want to be honest, this is the part of the story where I stopped being purely a passive discoverer of the truth and started actively looking for it. I picked up her phone, and I opened her messages with Tyler. I only had about 90 seconds before she came back out, and I didn't need any longer than that. The messages weren't ambiguous. They weren't coordinating a surprise. There were photos. There was language I'm not going to repeat here, language that made it very clear this hadn't been a one-time lapse, that it had been going on for months, since well before the engagement photo shoot, possibly since before Tyler and I had even set a wedding date. I took photos of 4 separate messages with my own phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake 2 of them, and put her phone back down exactly where she'd left it, angle and all, seconds before she walked back out in a bridesmaid dress that her sister, had picked out for her, smiling at me in the mirror like nothing in the entire world was wrong. "What do you think?" she asked, doing a small twirl. "Does it make me look too much like I'm trying to upstage you?" I told her it looked beautiful. I don't know even now exactly how I got those words out of my mouth in a normal voice. I think some part of me had already decided, standing in that fitting room, that I wasn't going to let either of them see this coming until I was completely ready on my own terms to make sure they did. I drove home that afternoon and sat in my car outside my own apartment for almost 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside, scrolling back through the photos I'd taken, forcing myself to actually read every word instead of skimming past the parts that hurt most. Because some part of me understood that I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I let myself feel any of it fully. I thought seriously about confronting Tyler privately first, just the 2 of us, giving him a chance to tell me the truth himself before I had to show him what I already knew. I decided against it in the end, for a reason that surprised me a little. I didn't trust that a private conversation would produce anything except a carefully managed version of an apology, one designed to protect the version of events he and Brooke could still control if it stayed between the 3 of us. I wanted witnesses not for cruelty, for truth. I'd spent the last several weeks being quietly, methodically lied to by 2 people who were both, simultaneously, planning to stand up in front of everyone I loved and pretend nothing was wrong. I decided the reveal needed to happen somewhere neither of them could quietly manage the narrative afterward. Somewhere the truth would land the way it actually deserved to land, in front of the people who'd been lied to right alongside me. My bridal shower was scheduled for the following Saturday, at my parents' house, planned almost entirely by my mother and notably by Brooke, who'd taken point on decorations and the guest list, so you don't have to think about a single thing, just show up and enjoy it. I thought about that phrase for a long time. Just show up and enjoy it. She'd spent weeks planning a party celebrating a wedding to a man she was actively sleeping with, and telling me, with what I now understood was a completely straight face, to relax and let her handle it. Priya helped me think through exactly what I wanted to say and, more importantly, what I didn't want to become in the saying of it. "You don't need to scream," she told me. "You don't need to throw a drink on anyone, as satisfying as that sounds right now. You have proof. Proof doesn't need volume. It just needs to be shown to the right people clearly once, and then you let everyone else's reaction do the rest of the work for you." I printed the messages, 4 of them, along with the hotel confirmation and a screenshot of Brooke's location history from that Thursday night, and put them in a plain envelope, the kind of envelope that could have held anything, a card, a gift receipt, nothing anyone would look twice at. I didn't tell my mother what I was planning. I didn't tell anyone except Priya, who agreed to come to the shower specifically to be standing near me when it happened, in case I needed either a hand to hold or a very calm voice reminding me to breathe. I went back and forth more than once that week on whether to at least warn my parents privately to spare them the shock of finding out in a room full of guests. I ultimately decided against it, and I still think even now that it was the right call, though I understand if someone disagrees. I needed my parents' reactions in that room to be real, unrehearsed, because I think some small, stubborn part of me needed witnesses who hadn't had time to prepare a calm face, who would react exactly the way any of us should react to something like this. I also, if I'm being fully honest, didn't trust that my mother, given advance warning, wouldn't try to talk me into handling it more quietly, more privately, in a way that protected everyone's comfort except mine. I spent that entire week functioning in a strange, dual state, still technically planning a wedding that I already knew, somewhere underneath all the calm, wasn't going to happen. I confirmed a final head count with the caterer. I picked up my dress from its last fitting, standing in front of the mirror in a gown I already understood I might never actually wear, and let the seamstress pin the final adjustments without saying a word about any of it. I did all of it with a kind of numb, forward momentum, because stopping to feel any of it fully before Saturday felt like something I genuinely could not afford to do yet. The shower was exactly what my mother and Brooke had planned: pastel decorations, a mimosa bar, about 30 women from both sides of my family and Tyler's, laughing, taking pictures, genuinely happy for me in a way that made what I was about to do feel enormous and necessary at the same time. Brooke gave a toast about halfway through, something sweet and rehearsed sounding about how I'd always been the sister who did everything right in order exactly the way it was supposed to happen, and how proud she was to watch me finally get the fairytale ending I deserved. I watched her deliver that toast, glass raised, completely composed, and felt something in me go very quiet and very clear. I waited until the gift-opening portion of the afternoon, when my mother handed me an envelope from the pile, unlabeled, and I said, loudly enough for the room to hear, "Actually, I have one more envelope I want to open myself before we keep going. Something I've been wanting to share with everyone today." I pulled my own envelope out of my bag instead. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, not yet. I read, calmly, the date and location of the hotel confirmation out loud, and then I held up the printed messages. Not close enough for anyone to read the specific words, just close enough that the photos attached to them were unmistakable, and said, "These are texts between my fiancé and my sister. This is a hotel booked for 2 people on a night they both separately lied to different people in this family about where they were." The room went so silent I could hear the ice settling in the drink someone was holding. Brooke's face went white, then red in the space of about 2 seconds. "Vanessa, this isn't the place." "You're right," I said. "It's not. Neither was a hotel room 3 weeks before my wedding. But you didn't seem too concerned about the right place when you picked one for that." My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make before, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Tyler's mother, sitting near the front, looked at her son's empty chair, then at Brooke, with an expression of pure, devastated recognition, like she'd just watched 30 years of raising a good son collapse into a single afternoon, even though he wasn't the one standing in that room to answer for it. My grandmother, 83 years old, sitting in the front row in her Sunday best, set down her mimosa with a hand that had gone completely steady, the opposite of shaking, and said into the silence, loud enough for the entire room, "Well, I suppose we know now why you were so eager to plan every last detail of this party, don't we, Brooke?" It wasn't a question. Nobody laughed exactly, but I heard at least 2 people near the back exhale something that might have been the beginning of one, quickly swallowed. The specific sound of a room that badly wants permission to react and has just been handed it by the oldest woman present. Tyler wasn't even there, thankfully, showers being women, only by tradition in my family, which meant Brooke had to stand in that room, in front of both of our mothers, both grandmothers, and 20-some other women with absolutely nowhere to redirect the moment. Tyler's father, sitting near my own dad, said nothing at all, just stood up slowly, walked over to his wife, and put a hand on her shoulder. The 2 of them looking in that moment like people bracing for a storm that had already arrived rather than one still approaching. "How long?" my mother finally asked, her voice shaking. Brooke didn't answer right away. When she finally did, it was barely audible. "A few months, maybe since spring." Since before the engagement photos. Since, I would later calculate, almost exactly the same week Tyler had proposed to me on that hiking trail he'd supposedly scouted for weeks to find the perfect overlook. The wedding, obviously, didn't happen. I canceled everything within the week: the venue, the caterer, the flowers, a process that involved a lot of apologetic phone calls and a surprising number of vendors, who, once I gave them the short version of why, refunded deposits they technically didn't have to refund at all. For what it's worth, that's an awful thing to go through, more than one of them told me. Tyler tried to call a lot for the first several weeks. I answered exactly once, long enough to tell him I'd seen the messages, all of them, and that there was nothing he could say that would matter more than what he'd already done. He tried the "it just happened, we didn't mean for it to happen" explanation, which I found almost funny in a bleak way, given the hotel booking had clearly required at least a small amount of planning to happen. Josh, his own brother and best man, texted me about a month later, unprompted. "I need you to know I had no idea. I would have told you the second I found out. I'm sorry, Vanessa. He's my brother and I still can't believe he did this to you." He ended up standing me a coffee a few weeks after that, mostly, I think, because he needed somewhere to put his own anger at his brother, and I happened to be the person who understood it best. We sat at a small cafe near my new apartment, both of us a little awkward at first, 2 people whose only real connection now was a betrayal neither of us had asked for. "I keep replaying every conversation I had with him this year," Josh told me, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table without drinking from it. "Every time he mentioned being tired or stressed or needing to reschedule something with me. I keep wondering how many of those were actually about her. I told him I'd been doing the same math, applying it backward across nearly a year of my own life, and that I didn't think either of us would ever get a fully honest answer, and that I'd mostly made peace with that not being the point anymore. Brooke and I haven't spoken since the shower, not really, beyond one furious, tearful phone call about 2 weeks later where she alternated between apologizing and explaining that she never meant to fall for him, as though falling were something that had simply happened to her in a hotel room she'd personally booked. "You've always gotten everything easily, Vanessa," she said at one point, her voice cracking in a sentence that took me a full 10 seconds to even process, given everything else she'd already admitted to. "The good grades, the steady job, now Tyler thinking you were perfect. I don't expect you to understand what it's like watching that from the outside your whole life." I told her as calmly as I could manage that I didn't get engaged to Tyler easily. I built that relationship for 3 years, and that whatever she'd been watching from the outside had apparently included her deciding at some point that the easiest solution to her own feelings was simply to take the thing itself instead of building anything of her own. My parents, to their enormous credit, didn't try to smooth this over or rush us toward some artificial reconciliation. My mother told me a few weeks later that she'd gone back through years of smaller moments, the jeans, the internship, a dozen things she'd always excused as sisters being sisters, and finally let herself see the actual pattern underneath all of it. I moved out of the apartment Tyler and I shared within 6 weeks, back in with my parents temporarily, which felt like a small, humbling defeat at 28, and also somehow like exactly the right place to fall apart for a while before rebuilding anything. My father, who doesn't say much, drove 2 hours each way 3 separate weekends to help me move boxes I could have technically hired someone to move, and never once mentioned Tyler's name the entire time, which I understood, without either of us saying it out loud, as its own quiet form of taking my side. It's been 8 months now. I have my own place again, a small 1-bedroom I picked entirely by myself, no committee of opinions, no compromise on paint colors. I started therapy about 3 months in, mostly at Priya's gentle, repeated insistence, and spent a lot of early sessions circling the same question. How much of what happened was actually about Tyler and Brooke, and how much of it was about a pattern I'd normalized for 26 years, telling myself that noticing what Brooke took from me and staying quiet about it anyway was simply the price of being the older, more forgiving sister. I don't have a clean answer to that yet. I'm not sure I need one. I've started slowly practicing a much smaller, much stranger skill, saying out loud in the moment when something feels wrong instead of filing it away for some future story I'll eventually tell a therapist or a stranger on the internet years later. I still don't know exactly where things stand with Brooke long term. I know I'm not interested in a fast, easy forgiveness just to make family gatherings less awkward. I know that whatever relationship we eventually rebuild, if we rebuild one at all, is going to have to be built on her actually reckoning with what she did, not on everyone else quietly agreeing to move past it for her comfort. I kept that plain envelope, by the way, not out of spite, just as a strange, private reminder that I trusted my own instincts enough to find the truth and had the composure to use it exactly the way I wanted to, on my own terms, in my own time, instead of letting either of them control how or when I found out. If you've ever discovered a betrayal hiding in plain sight, or had to decide how and when to reveal a truth that was going to change everything, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Please like this video, subscribe for more stories like this every week, and remember, proof doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true.